So tonight we have a speaker from Israel. Avi Lipkin's been on the circuit for about 45 years? 31 years, okay. He's been on the circuit for 31 years. He's approaching his 40th year. And so he's been carrying this message concerning Christians and Jews for a long, long time. And this is a wonderful thing, and I want to encourage you to keep doing it. Avi has written 7 books, and he's working on number 8. 8 is the number of completion, and we're hoping that you don't complete at 8. You go on to 9 and so on. So he will have his books out in the foyer. He also has lots of videos that he's made over the years as well. Avi is a tremendous sort of a scholarly type. I'm learning that about him. He has good take on history, and not only his history as it relates to Israel, but history in general. So he's sort of a wealth of understanding, insight. And so I would love to hear more of his historiographies and so on. So I want to just introduce you to, again, a few months ago he was here. So I'm going to introduce you a second time to Avi Lipkin. Avi, come on up.
Is it working? I'm going to have to whisper. Anyway, shalom to everyone. And, they say every speaker is taught the following rule, that when you get up to speak, the first thing you say, I'm going to talk about this and this and this and this. Then you talk about this and this and this and this. And then when you finish the message, okay, I just spoke about this and this and this and this. So I'm going to be talking this evening about what made America great. And of course, it's Christianity. Judeo-Christianity, to be exact. And America is threatened by totalitarian powers, that the people are good, but the systems are bad. You never see a democracy attacking a democracy. Those who wish to attack America or Israel are totalitarian in nature. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about the possibility of a civil war or public strife here in America. And this is, of course, the dream of the totalitarian nations that wish to see America brought down. As a result of this strife, or civil war, God forbid, the Jewish people in America and certain Christians, like the ones who attend this church, are going to be targeted by people who hate Jews and people who hate Christians. There are about 6 million Jews in America, and of course we hate the Christians till we marry them. And so 6 million Jews are married to about 4 million Christians in America. According to the Israeli law of return, these 10 million Jews and Christians are entitled to move to Israel if they wish. Now, I created, with God's help, and a lot of help from people like you, I created a Judeo-Christian political party to run for our Knesset. You know, Israel is a very big country like the United States, but we have 38 political parties. And our Bible Bloc Party is one of the 38 parties. We are the only party in the Israeli political system that has Christian believers in our candidate list. And many people think that I'm crazy and this is, Israel is the Jewish state and why should we allow Christians to be in our government? But I'll tell you, the Muslims, they're good people, and the Muslims have 10 members of Knesset who are Muslim because they represent that constituency. We have 5 members of Knesset who are from the Druze community, D-R-U-Z-E. Christians, 0. So I'm working to fix that. Because as you all know, having been born in America or living in America, there's something called no taxation without representation. And in Israel, we have about 8% of our population is made up of non-Jews who are considered believers. These Christians serve in the army, Israeli army, they pay taxes, they vote, and they're married to us. But they have no representation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack tonight's message from 4 different angles, starting with World War, then American Civil War, then Jews and Christians moving to Israel, and finally preparing Israel for an immigration of tens of millions of people, mostly Christians, or those who originate from Jewish background, Anusim and others. I see a great future because, you know, the Israelis have developed a fantastic desalination program for seawater. And we have developed a fantastic solar energy. Everybody talks about renewable energy. We live in the desert. And we can set up these solar panels for electricity, use the electricity to desalinate water, and then turn the entire Middle East green. What did God say at the beginning of Genesis? That Adam and Eve were to tend his garden. And what happened, unfortunately, over the millennia is that the gardens have been turned into deserts. And the purpose of the Jews and the Christians together is to turn the desert green, to tend God's garden in the Middle East. I'm very excited because I think we're going to see this in our lifetimes. So let me start. And you were right about history. I'm a history fanatic. When you're a history fanatic, you do not judge who is right and who is wrong, because everyone is right in their way of thinking. So when you're in history, you say, well, this side says this, and this side says that, and that side says that. Everyone's right. You know, we have a joke in Judaism that 2 people end up in court. They come before the judge, and the plaintiff complains, says, this guy, such and such and such and such. And the judge says, you're right. So the defendant says, hey, wait a second. I didn't say my side of the story. So the defendant says his side of the story. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the judge says, and you're also right. So a third guy gets up and says, well, it can't be that both sides are right. And the judge says, you're also right. So that's something we learned in the Israeli Army spokesman's office. And actually, one of the reasons that I was invited here 25 years ago and then I was not invited anymore was because I was saying that even though I was Likud at the time, that the Labour Party also had some valuable ideas regarding the defense of Israel. So I was banned from this church. And I'm back now. And I think maybe some of you will be wondering, why is Netanyahu not prime minister anymore? And I want you to know, I love Netanyahu. He was the greatest prime minister we ever had. Longest lasting, greatest prime minister. But in my opinion, it was time for him to go to the next stage and let Israel choose some new leaders. I think in America it's called term limits. And this last week, the last 2 weeks, they're talking about 8-year term limits. I think that's fantastic. You cannot have a prime minister running the show for decades and squelching any development of a new, younger leadership. And that's what happened. The new prime minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, was Netanyahu's right-hand man until he got pushed out by Netanyahu. Avigdor Lieberman was pushed out. Gideon Sa'ar was pushed out. Zev Elkin was pushed out. Ayelet Shaked, who may be prime minister one day, the next lady prime minister in Israel. So these are all great people from the Likud who were forced to leave by Netanyahu or by his wife. Okay. You know, the rabbi, before he speaks, he says, before I speak, I'd like to say a few words. So I just said a few words. Now I start my message. There was a great German philosopher 200 years ago. You probably know him, Heinrich Heine. Heinrich Heine spoke 200 years ago, and he said, the world is going to have to choose between the foolishness of the Americans and the despotism and tyranny of the Russians. Has anyone ever heard that? No. So, well, you know, like, you're here to hear new things, you know. And foolishness of the Americans or the despotism and tyranny of the Russians. And this is before communism. This is when the Tsar was ruling Russia. Then there was a Frenchman. Maybe some of you might, there was more of a chance you'd know about him, but if you don't know about him, you need to get his book after you get all my books. His name is Alexis de Tocqueville. How many people heard of Alexis de Tocqueville? 1, 2, 3. 3 hands. Alexis de Tocqueville came here also 200 years ago from France after the French Revolution. And as you know, the French Revolution finally was suppressed, and the reactionary monarchs came back, and the only place you had democracy was America. Actually, Switzerland also, but America. So Alexis de Tocqueville came here, and he lived here for decades. And he went around the Appalachians and other parts of the frontier west. At that time, frontier west was the Appalachians in 1820, 1830, 1840. He wanted to understand, who are these Americans? He wanted to understand, what's this democracy? Because nowhere else in the world was there this kind of democracy. And one of his conclusions was that the American democracy in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, and the American Revolution was part of the ethic of the Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christianity. Right. Whereas the Catholic Europe, or the Orthodox Christianity of Russia and other countries in the Eastern Europe, these churches suppressed democracy. But the Protestant Christianity of America encouraged democracy. It's Christianity also. You know, there's some people here in America, they don't like it when you say that Putin is a Christian. There's a pastor in New York, used to have me speak in his church. I was on his radio show all the time. He won't have me anymore because I said Putin's a Christian. No, he's not a Christian. He's Russian Orthodox. It's like Protestants who say, if you're a Catholic, you're not a Christian either. Listen, I'm a Jew. I love everybody. That's supposed to be funny. Anyway. You know what? America is kind of like a pussycat. You throw a pussycat in the air, it falls on its feet. Always falls on its feet. And I say that America is kind of like that pussycat. Because the American leadership is always making mistakes. If you know American history, it doesn't matter Republican, Democrat, everyone's making mistakes. But America always comes out on top. The essence, the originality of America basically goes back to the Old Testament, to the Tanakh, and then it goes to the Greek philosophy of 300 BC, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. A lot of this Greek philosophy came into Judaism. And during the time of Jesus, there were a lot of Jewish rabbis with Greek names. It's like today, you know, America has a great influence on countries all over the world. Then the Romans, I studied in seminary, it went nuts. You know, we studied the Mishnah. The Mishnah was compiled around 200 AD. And the rabbis don't like to admit it, but the Mishnah was basically not copied, but it was in the image of Virgil. How many people have heard of Virgil in Roman history? The lawgiver. So everybody's saying, no, that culture is no good, that culture is no good, that's no good, but everybody's stealing from everybody. And then you had centuries and centuries and centuries of war in Europe. You had the Crusades. And of course, the Crusades were a very logical response to the Muslim invasions of Europe. Of course, the Jews were always getting killed, but that's our history, that we're getting killed. Then Marco Polo went out to China and he brought us macaroni and firecrackers. Huh? And paper, a lot of things. And then you had the Renaissance. You had the Enlightenment. Here in America, people started to develop these strange ideologies. You know, don't forget 1215, the Magna Carta, the purpose of which was to limit the powers of the king to do whatever he felt like. In other words, it was against totalitarianism. The Russians, the Chinese, they never had that. Russian history really begins in 995 AD with the beginning of the Russian Orthodox Church. So we're talking about over 1,100 years. And one of the reasons the Russian Orthodox Church was so successful was the war with Islam. Because the Turks and all these other groups were attacking from the south. But they never had the Magna Carta. The Chinese never had the Magna Carta. So they're totalitarian also. This virus of democracy is something which Western civilization has started with America. Today, Western Europe is democratic. The great enemies of the past, the Germans, for example, today they're democratic and they're the best friends of America. They're the best. Germany's the best friend of Israel today. Germany is the most important country in Europe today. Remember Japan? I grew up with World War II, so we were taught how bad the Japs were. Today the Japanese are democratic, they play baseball because of General Douglas MacArthur, and the Japanese are the best friends America has in the Far East. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, all of a sudden you have all these countries in Eastern Europe, they became democracies. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Basically, the only country in Eastern Europe that is still a Soviet dictatorship is Belarus, Lukashenko. And the Russians, of course, the Russian leadership, the Russian people want democracy. The government doesn't. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Chinese never knew democracy. It's not in their culture. And I've been 31 years preaching in the churches about Islam. My wife picked up broadcasts in Arabic from Saudi Arabia. Remember George W. Bush during the Iraq War said, "We're going to bring democracy to Iraq." And the Saudis said, "Over our dead bodies." Right. There will never be democracy in Islam. There will never be democracy in Soviet socialist countries, or China, or North Korea, or Cuba, or Venezuela. So you begin to see today the makings of World War III. You know, I grew up in a Spanish-speaking home. I'm a Latino, like many here. It's just every time I open my mouth and speak Spanish, everybody starts laughing because Argentine Spanish sounds like Italian. Because 65% of Argentina is Italian. And so we grew up with Latin America in the 50s and 60s, and they were military dictatorships. It was horrible. Right-wing fascist military dictatorships. They would take socialist, communist kids, take them up in military aircraft and drop them over the Atlantic without parachutes. I mean, if they had parachutes, it wouldn't have helped any. You look at Latin America today, you've got some Latin American nations that are socialist, like Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador. Argentina is kind of a crazy country. They have Peronism. But they have free elections. The people decide. Venezuela, Cuba, that's communist bloc. And Islamic bloc, Shiite Islam. You look at Africa. Africa has problems, but Africa is moving, I think, very nicely into the world of democracy. A lot because of the high tech. You have countries in Africa that are becoming very nice countries, very democratic countries. So, in my opinion, the overall view of history is that Western-style democracy, Judeo-Christian Western civilization and democracy, are actually advancing and showing greater influence in countries in North America, Latin America, Africa, maybe Asia a little bit, but wherever you have communism and Islam, there can be no democracy. And you have to remember, in the case of Saddam Hussein, George W. Bush said something which made no sense, because when he said democracy in Iraq, and American soldiers died for that, the problem was Saddam Hussein represented 20% of the population, Arab Sunnis, 20% of the Kurds, that's 40% altogether, they were Sunnis, and 60% of Iraq was Shiites. And Saddam Hussein was annihilating hundreds of thousands of Shiites, but they were 60%. So when America came in and removed Saddam Hussein, and President George W. Bush said, we're going to give democracy to the Iraqi people, well, what's democracy? It's majority rule. So who won the elections in Iraq? The Shiites. So it's the first thing they did, take out their vengeance on the Sunnis. There's no democracy really in Iraq. They have elections, but maybe they will get there one day. You know when they'll get there? When you have democracy in Iran, you'll have democracy in Iraq. And everybody hates America until they come here to get a green card and American citizenship. Huh? And food stamps, yeah. Well, all I'm saying is everybody hates America until they want to come and live here. Do you see Americans going to live in Russia? Do you see Americans going to live in China?
No. Not many.
But they want to come here, and they do come here. You all know that Russia's population is shrinking? Russia's population is shrinking. They have a low birth rate. And Russians are genius, wonderful people. So they want to get out of Russia, and they come here. Chinese? You know there are a lot of Chinese here. I love the Chinese. They vote with their feet. They leave. All the people who hate America, in the end, they all want to come here and live here. There are two countries, actually three, but two really important countries, where the population is growing. Israel and the US. Israel and the US, the population is growing. You know, I have to tell you, I flew from Dallas a few days ago. I'm going back day after tomorrow. In my hotel, all these girls are illegals. They came across in the last few weeks. They don't speak any English. And I don't want to say I interviewed them, I chat with them. They're wonderful family Christian girls. When I say to them, que Dios te bendiga, y a ti también. May God bless you, and say, may He bless you also. I don't want to say the Democrats are right, but a lot of these Latino people coming from South America, from Venezuela, they're coming here. They want to work, they want to live. America is the only country. But you have people in these tyrannical, despotic countries that want to destroy America. And they want to destroy Israel. Whatever happens to Israel happens to America, and vice versa. Whatever happens to the Jews happens to the Christians, and vice versa. We're stuck with each other. And the purpose of everything I'm doing is to bring us all together, the Jews and the Christians, and hopefully to build good relations with the Hindus, with the Buddhists, and others. You know, I was born in 1949, and in the 1950s, 60s, there was a TV program called Victory at Sea. The older people, how many people know Victory at Sea? I grew up with that. And you learn the history of the war, of course, through the eyes of the American spokespeople. Today, young people in America know nothing about World War II or the Korean War, commonly known as the Forgotten War. Or even the Vietnam War, people don't know anything about it. American boys and girls sacrificed their lives to defend Western civilization and democracy. And I'll say in a generalization, like I said before, we see the spreading of democracy and Judeo-Christian Western civilization everywhere in the world today. And so it makes me pretty optimistic. You know, America avoided World War I. Americans are an isolationist people. You have the Atlantic Ocean on one side, you have the Pacific on the other side, you have Canada to the north. Canada is absolutely the best neighboring country that anyone could want. Mexico to the south, they're different, but they're Christians. In Central America, Latin America. America is very protected because of this. So Americans don't want to know. Many people in America don't know who the Prime Minister of Canada is. Many people in America don't know who the President of Mexico is. Next door neighbors. Americans don't know, and they don't care. Your media doesn't tell you anything. So you have to come to hear me speak because I talk about these things. And my family is from Argentina. My grandparents were from Russia and Poland. I was born in New York. I live in Israel. My wife is Egyptian. We speak Arabic. We speak Hebrew. So Americans really don't know what's going on. World War I was a European war. I think World War I was the stupidest of all the wars. World War I was totally unnecessary. And millions of people died, a lot of destruction. And America stayed out of World War I from August 1914 until November 1917. Who was the president? A Democrat socialist, Woodrow Wilson. I'm not saying it as a criticism. I'm just saying, look at what I'm about to say. World War II, you had a Democrat socialist president, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he stayed out of World War II until Pearl Harbor. But World War II started, how many people heard of Korea? 1905, the Japanese take Korea. Do you know why the Japanese took Korea in 1905? Because the Americans said, go take Korea because we take Latin America, the Monroe Doctrine. How many people heard of the Monroe Doctrine? So the Japanese, their sphere of influence was Korea. Then the Japanese took Manchuria, northern China. They renamed it Manchukuo. I collect stamps, so I know all these things. Then they invaded China. 1937, the rape of Nanking. How many people heard of the rape of Nanking? Horrible. The Japanese killed like 400,000 Chinese in just a few days. In America, it doesn't concern us. It's far away. There was a time when America was supplying Japan with railroad cars, subway cars from New York City, so the Japanese could melt them down and turn them into battleships. And then the United States said, we're going to sanction Japan because of what happened in China. And it made the Japanese very angry. We're going to put an embargo on Japan. No oil. The Japanese islands don't have oil and they don't have natural resources. And so you had Pearl Harbor. I'm talking now as a Japanese. The Japanese wanted to take out their vengeance on the US for the sanctions. And Admiral Yamamoto said to the Japanese High Command, don't attack America, it's a big mistake. Because he studied in Harvard and he was in the Japanese legation in Boston, I think it was in Boston. After the Pearl Harbor attack, Yamamoto said, we have awakened the sleeping giant. This is very important for what I'm about to say about China. And America basically was coming out of a horrible, horrible recession from 1927 till 1939. Forgive me for saying it. America needed a war to get the American industry up and running and become world power number one. America outproduced the enemy. The Germans were the best fighters in World War II, but the German industry could not compete with the American industry. It's all about economics. So let's look at China today. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to get to Israel. All of this is interconnected. And I want you to know that the Chinese Communist Party is very popular in China. How many people know that? The standard of living of the Chinese people is higher today than it ever was. For centuries, the Chinese were killing each other and starving. China was a mess. And the Chinese Communist Party listens to what the people are saying in China. But the Chinese have a problem. They are being blinded by their own success. And they look at America, and they say America is a has-been. How many people have heard America's a has-been? America lasted 400 years, and it's going to end very soon. And there are people interested in seeing that. The Russians, the Chinese, others. Huh? Joe Biden. I'm going to get to Joe Biden. The problem is, if I get to Joe Biden, Vimeo is going to take me off. Should I talk about Joe Biden anyway?
You already said the name.
Yeah, so no, wait a second. The Japanese high command in World War II said, these Americans are stupid, they're lazy, they'll never go to war. And we Japanese, we can get away with everything. That was their mistake. The Chinese are saying exactly the same thing today. America has a president, you know, I won't mention his name because I don't want Vimeo to take me off. Do you remember in school, there was always this kid who was not popular in the class, so somebody would take a piece of paper and write on it, "kick me," and put it on his backside. That's the kind of president we have. We have a guy who's going around with "kick me." And so China and all these countries, they want to kick America because they think America's stupid. Can I preach a little bit Christianity also? I'm a Jew who preaches Christianity because Christianity is Judaism, you know. I think it's 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 15. You know, I'm throwing, people can correct me if I'm wrong. The foolishness of the Lord is greater than the wisdom of man. How many people have heard that? And the weakness of the Lord is greater than the strength of man. That's in 1 Corinthians. It's also in Proverbs. Do you know why America is like a pussycat? You throw it in the air, it lands on its feet? Because Americans are foolish, but they're foolish in the Lord. The moment you take out the Lord, America is just foolish. That's the threat to America today. As long as you're faithful to God, the Bible, Jesus Christ, Israel, you will always be blessed by God. No matter how bad things might look, you're always going to come out on top. Because that's what made America great. You know what Putin says? What made Russia great is Christianity. That scares me. So today the Chinese feel that there are sanctions on them. And it's not about this president or that president, because it started with President Trump. Now it's also Biden. But you know what? Your presidents really don't decide anything. Your presidents are told what to do by the establishment, especially by the military-industrial complex. You don't have to tell you, how many people remember Chuck Missler? 1, 2, 3, 4 hands. I used to work very closely with Chuck Missler, rest in peace. Some of my teachings at Koinonia House are on the back table. So the Americans have weapons This is what happened. I went to visit Chuck Missler, and some lady comes up to me. I don't even remember who she is. And she said that her father, rest in peace, worked for Star Wars for President Reagan in the 1980s. Do you know why the Soviet Union collapsed? Because the Soviet Union could not keep up with Star Wars. And America developed such horrible weapons. You don't want to know what kind of weapons have been developed. Of course, today we see biological weapons floating around. And we don't even know if it's the Chinese or if it's Fauci or the Canadians and the Americans. Everybody is playing with biological weapons. Crazy. The whole world is upside down now because of COVID. And this woman said to me, of course her father's dead, maybe she's dead by now because she was also not a young girl. America has weapons that can erase any country on the face of the earth. How many people heard about the Chinese hypersonic missile? The Russians also have hypersonic missile. Let's say, God forbid, they launch a missile or two at an American city, wipe out the city, kill maybe 1, 2, 10 million Americans. I'm being very cynical now. You've got people in the military-industrial complex with a very, very itchy trigger finger. Make my day. Remember Clint Eastwood, Make Our Day? 90% of China could be erased because the whole Chinese population is concentrated in 3 river valleys. And you know the problem America has with China is economic. And China's getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and America, who knows what's happening to America? What's the solution? War. I say this with pain because I love the Chinese. I don't want a war. I don't want to see Chinese die. I don't want to see Russians die. I don't see anybody die. But as Bill Clinton used to say, hey, it's the economy, stupid. So if you have this competition of economies, Russia's 140 million people, shrinking by 1 million every year. The population of Russia is like the population of Italia, Italy. The GDP is the same as Italy. I personally don't think the Russians will attack America if the Chinese do. I think the Russians will make a lot of huffing and puffing, but I think the Russians will stay out. I have to tell you a little story, just to give you an idea of the things I pick up. There was an officer course in Russia for the Russian military, and they were told that the Jews, the Israelis, fought against the Arabs who outnumbered them 100 to 1, and the Jews won. And so one of the officers in the Russian class in the military was saying, hey, we're outnumbered 10 to 1 by the Chinese. Maybe we should bring some of these Israelis here to Russia so that they can defeat the Chinese. In other words, if you meet any Russians, they will tell you the real enemy of Russia is the Chinese. But the Russians are very attached to the Chinese because the Russians supply them with oil and gas. And you don't want to mess with China. I think the primary problem here is China versus the US. The Chinese took Hong Kong. They promised 2 systems, 1 nation. You see what's happening in Hong Kong. They took Portuguese Macau, a bunch of casinos. It's China today. Now they want to take Taiwan. Do you know when Taiwan will be happy to join communist China? When it's no longer communist China, when it's democratic China. I pray for the Chinese people that they will have democracy. Do you know the staunchest ally of Taiwan is? Japanese. Japanese have a history with the Taiwan. And if communist China attacks Taiwan, Japanese are going to respond. Australia is going to respond. How many people heard today in the news that Chinese naval vessels were spraying high-powered water on Filipino ships, chased them away? And the US government said You're not going to do this. This was in Philippine waters. See, the Chinese are encroaching on Philippine territory, and America has an alliance with the Philippines. There are a bunch of islands in that area called Spratly. How many people heard of Spratly? Spratly has oil and gas. The first thing the Chinese did, they took all these atolls and they built landing strips and military bases. And the Chinese never said to the Filipinos, who have demands there and rights there, let's share. Or with Vietnam, or with Indonesia. Let's share, let's put together a program. No, Chinese want it all for themselves. And the mentality of the Chinese today is the mentality of the Japanese in the 1930s. And they are sure they're going to win. Because America is soft and weak and foolish. Remember what I said? Foolish in the Lord, you'll always be number one. This is a Christian preaching I'm preaching. So this is the first part of my message. Second part of my message, and I think I spoke about it when I was, I don't know if did I talk about the neo-Nazi I had dinner with?
Yes.
How many people remember what I shared? I don't see one hand, so I got to repeat it again. How many people know that the Jewish people, 70% of them voted for the Democrats?
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Only 70%.
No, 30% voted Trump.
Okay.
So I meet this neo-Nazi. I just knew he was a militiaman. And he asked me, what do you think about George Floyd? I said, well, that was a horrible crime. And that policeman has to be in jail, and he's in jail for killing George Floyd. And what do you think about defund the police, he said to me. I said, well, I think it's horrible, because if you defund the police, you're going to have crime in the streets, you're going to have murder, and there's no police to deal with it. And by the way, COVID-19 and these vaccinations have caused a lot of police to quit. So your law enforcement is going down, down, down. And so he said, what do you think about that? I said, well, it's horrible. He said, no, you're wrong. It's good. I said, what do you mean it's good? He said, with the killing of George Floyd and defund the police, we went up from 3 million militia members to 30 million militia members here in America. Because there's no police. If there's no police, you have to have somebody else doing the guarding. And you know everybody in America has guns. And you know what he said to me? This is when I got up from the table and left. He said, the first thing we're going to do is kill all the Jews in America. Because the Jews are Democrats, they're socialists, they're traitors, kill them. In other words, we are in a situation like Germany in the 1930s. The Nazis came to power, but firstly the Nazis were only 30%, but they burned down the Reichstag and they took over the country. But there were many German people who felt betrayed by the Jews in World War I, even though the Jews fought in Kaiser's army. The Jews were heroes in World War I, in the German army. Kaiser Wilhelm was the only leader who gave kosher food to the Jewish soldiers in World War I. How many people know that? All the other armies, there's no kosher food for the Jewish soldiers. The Jews in the German army in World War I received more Iron Cross, more than the Christians, disproportionately. My family was from Warsaw, Poland. The Germans were the liberators in World War I. You know, history is like a pendulum. Your enemy today is your ally tomorrow, the next day they're the enemy, the next day they're the ally. And the problem is people are not paying attention to anything. So when he said to me, we're going to kill all the Jews, I said, you'll excuse me, I cannot sit with you anymore. Anyone who says they're going to kill the Jews, I get up and I leave. And that's what I did. Now, for those of you who know me, in my red book on the back table, I have a chapter there about, or part there about, the Edmonton Revelation, where Islamic terrorists are planning today to kill all the Jews in America and Canada and in the West. I think there are about 30 million of them in America. 10%, 3 million, are armed and ready to kill the Jews. And the neo-Nazis armed and ready to kill the Jews. Black Lives Matter, which is organized by the Islamic Jihad, will kill the Jews. Antifa, how many people heard of Antifa? They're communist, socialist, anarchists. They'll kill Jews and Christians because they're against God. I see a Holocaust here in America. And I don't want to say with whom I met, but I referred all my information to top people in Israel. I came here 5 weeks ago, so 6 weeks ago, it appeared in the Israeli press that Israel has drawn up emergency plans for the evacuation of 500,000 Jews from the United States. And there are people in Russia and there are people in China who want to stir up a civil war in America. Because the best way to destroy America is if Americans are fighting each other. Civil war. I pray to God it never happens. But what I do know is that the Jews are always in the middle of these fraternicides, where everybody's killing everybody. So why am I telling you this? I formed a Judeo-Christian political party in Israel. We are the only Judeo-Christian party out of 38 parties. And I want you to know, I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but if you buy the books and CDs and DVDs on the table, that money is going to translating my book about the party into Hebrew and Russian. Because we have 5 languages that we have to campaign in Israel. Russian, Arabic, Hebrew, English, and Amharic. How many people know we have 150,000 Ethiopians who just moved to Israel? You gotta speak in their language too. 2 of my candidates are Ethiopians. You've got to have candidates from the different groups. You have to have the languages. And this needs money. I don't have money. From day one when I started my party, I didn't have money. My lawyer said to me, you need at least $500,000 if you want to start a party. I have never had $500,000 in my life. Everything is by faith and by support from people like you. And I'm going back to Israel in 10 days. And God willing, Pastor Roger, I hope to be back here in March, April, and to present you with a copy of my book in Hebrew, maybe in Russian also. You need 140,000 votes to get into the Knesset with the first 4 members of Knesset, 140,000 votes. The Russians are 400,000 Christians in Israel. In other words, if we get to the Russians, we're in the Knesset big time. But the Israelis have to get the message in Hebrew because the Israelis also have to vote. You know, there are many Israelis who come to live in America because we have Israelis who also want America. Yes, so, and I want to bring America to Israel. So at this time, for 120 members of Knesset, we have 8%. That should give us 8 or 9 members of Knesset. I should be in the next Knesset. I don't know if I'll be in the next Knesset, maybe the one after that. My candidate list is Jew, Christian, Jew, Christian, Jew, Christian. Again, we're the only political party that is giving the Christians representation. I know many of you, your eyes glaze over when you hear about politics in some strange foreign country, and for some of you, Israel is a strange foreign country. You know, the Messiah, who's a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew, for the Christians, that's Jesus Christ. Terrific. We don't know, we Jews don't know who the Messiah is, but we know that the Messiah is a Jew from Israel who speaks Hebrew. He's going to appear on the Mount of Olives, and we're going to check his hands. Pastor Roger and Mrs. Diaz are going to come with me up to the Messiah and say, can we look at your hands, please? That's fine with me. The Messiah is not coming or returning only for the Jehovah's Witnesses. You guys are not listening to me. I'm saying crazy things here. The Messiah is not coming or returning only for the Southern Baptists. You know the difference between Southern Baptists and Northern Baptists? Northern Baptists go to hell. That's a Texas joke. I get a lot of mileage in Texas with that joke. I tried telling that in Canada, nobody liked it. Anyway. He's not coming only for the Catholics. He's not coming only for the Orthodox Christians. You know, I speak to Orthodox Christians, oh, only the Orthodox Christians go to heaven. Catholics say only Catholics go to heaven. How much time do we have left? So I want to tell you something very strange that's happening. The Nazis had something called the Nuremberg Laws. How many people heard of the Nuremberg Laws? Nuremberg Laws, 1936. If you had a Jewish grandparent, you were Jewish. You would be sent to the gas chambers. And there were exceptions made. There were Jews who were half Jewish, half German, and they were called Mischling, you know, mixed Jew and Christian. So sometimes if the Nazis needed them, so they served in the Wehrmacht. So the Nuremberg laws were very exact. If you were 1/4 Jewish, you were Jewish. Or if a Christian married a Jew and would not leave the spouse, that spouse who was a Christian would also die. There was a whole list of things where the Germans had all kinds of rules about sending people to concentration camps. So the Israeli government in 1949 passed a law called the Law of Return, that if you are 1/4 Jewish, in other words, 3 Christian grandparents, and you go to church every Sunday, but you are still entitled to move to Israel. That's why out of 2 million Russian-speaking immigrants who came to Israel, 400,000 are not Jewish. These are the people I'm trying to reach. They should have political representation because the law of return allowed them to return. Today, our population in Israel is 7 million Jews, 500,000 non-Jews, in other words, Christians. 2.5 million people are Muslims. They have representation. But what I'm saying is, if indeed there is a breakdown in the West, and if indeed the Islamic Jihad is looking to kill Jews and their Christian spouses, or pastors who are pro-Israel or pro-Jewish, the law in Israel allows you to move to Israel. If you have one Jewish, does anyone here have a Jewish grandparent? Okay. You're allowed to move to Israel if you can prove that the grandparent is Jewish. And I want to go back again. World War I, the Germans were the best friends of the Jewish people. My family was from Warsaw, from Poland. And the Germans were our saviors. They gave us food, they gave us work. It was the Russians who wanted to kill us, starve us to death, kidnap our children. Germans were perfect aristocratic gentlemen. That's why in World War II, when they put up over the concentration camps Arbeit macht frei, the Jews believed them. Arbeit macht frei means labor frees you from death. And the Jews went to the concentration camps because the Jews had not interiorized the metamorphosis that took place in the German character because of the Nazis. How many people heard of Michael Savage radio show? And Michael Savage was saying anybody who denies the Jewish Holocaust is guilty of 2 sins: denying the Jewish Holocaust and denying the Christian Holocaust. Because Adolf Hitler killed 7 million Christians in the concentration camps. And he killed them before he killed the Jews. So that when the time of the Jews came, there was nobody to defend them. Again, whoever kills Jews kills Christians. Whoever kills Christians kills Jews. And so the Israeli government decided anyone who can claim one Jewish grandparent can move to Israel, or anybody who is married to a Jew is allowed to move to Israel, any Christian. So today in Israel, we have a problem. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish what I was going to say. So the rabbis in Europe in the 1930s there were people from Israel, from the Palestine Mandate of the British, who were coming to Europe and saying, liquidate the diaspora or the diaspora will liquidate you. There were people who came to the Jewish communities in Poland and in Europe and said, get out of Europe now while you can. And there were many Jews in Germany who could have gotten out. They didn't want to because they loved Germany. They stayed and they died. And the rabbis, this is the important part, the ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic rabbis in Europe were saying to their flocks, don't leave, because the Germans will never do it to you, because the Germans were good in World War I. And so, because of their ignorance, the rabbis are also partly to blame for the death of 6 million Jews in World War II. So what do we have today in America? Now I'm giving you the future. We have the Islamic terrorists, the neo-Nazi terrorists, Black Lives Matter terrorists, Antifa terrorists. And one thing they all have in common, kill the Jews. And I'm telling the Israeli government, prepare for millions of Jews and Christians to come home. So what do the rabbis say? No, we don't want them. The rabbis in Israel say, we don't want the Messianics, and we don't want the Christians. And then they say, we don't want the Reform Jews, the conservative Jews, the unaffiliated Jews. Better that they stay in America and they die in this Holocaust. So all of a sudden I realize that the real purpose of my party is not just to give representation to Christians, but the real purpose of my party is to stand up for 10 million people who potentially can move to Israel, and some of them will. I don't know if it's 1 million, 2 million, whatever. Then there are the Anusim. There are tens of millions of Anusim who want to move to Israel, but they're not Jewish. It's a problem. Avi Lipkin has a solution. We have a double whammy here, and I'm going to probably conclude with this because I think it's already an hour. You've all heard of ISIS. President Trump said ISIS has been eliminated. Firstly, that's not true. But wherever they were supposedly eliminated, this was Syria, Iraq. But they're there. ISIS is pure Islam. It is pure Sunni Islam. I don't know if you know this or not. Saudi Arabia is 92% pro-ISIS. Jordan, 80% pro-ISIS. It was in the news in Israel before I came here 6 weeks ago that King Abdullah of Jordan spent $100 million to buy houses here in America. Did anyone hear of that? If you look up King Abdullah and start following the news reports, you'll see it. Because King Abdullah knows the writing is on the wall. The time is running out for him and his family. I'm not happy about it. I wish Jordan well. Israel has agreements with Jordan, giving them more water, and there are all kinds of projects being developed. But 80% of the Jordanians are Sunni ISIS supporters. Now, if and when there's a revolution and ISIS takes over, which is not such a big deal for them to do, there will be black flags of ISIS along the Jordan River. You know what the black flags mean? They're digging tunnels under the Jordan River. The Jordan River, in case you didn't know, is like a little creek, basically, compared to what you see in America. If there are black flags on the Jordan River, with ISIS ruling in Jordan, Israel is going to have to intervene in Jordan, meaning invade and clear out ISIS. I want you to know, my wife, always sitting in the living room playing Candy Crush, she became addicted to Candy Crush. And then when she gets tired of the Candy Crush, she goes to the emails and she checks the Arabic news on her phone. And I'm in the kitchen and she's in the living room. All of a sudden she yells, "Come here quickly." And I come running over to my wife. What's the problem? She says, you're on Egyptian TV. I was on Egyptian TV 6 weeks ago. I have it in my phone. Had my picture, had my yellow book, Return to Mecca. It had the logo of my Bible Bloc Party and the words Israel Bible Bloc Party. And the lady who was being interviewed, specialist, was saying, Avi Lipkin is a senior Mossad officer. How many people know I'm a senior Mossad officer? I wish I were. I'm 73, I'd be having a nice retirement. I'm not, I was never with the Mossad. I tried to be with the Mossad, they rejected me. It's a funny story. I won't get into it. Maybe I talk too much, I don't know. They said he was sent by Jerusalem to mobilize the Christians to fight the Muslims. I was not sent by Jerusalem. I wasn't sent by Jerusalem. Remember the Blues Brothers? I'm on a mission from God. And they show my picture, they show my book, they show my face, they show my Bible Bloc Party. And they say to me that the Israeli Foreign Ministry endorses everything I'm saying. That we're going to take Saudi Arabia, destroy the Kaaba, the Black Stone, Mecca and Medina, and we're going to terminate Islam. I'm a dangerous man. 92% of Saudi Arabia is ISIS, Sunni Orthodox Muslims. And they're going to kill King Salman and his family and take it over and turn it into caliphate together with Jordan. Wait a second, I'm not finished. You heard of Syria? You heard of the civil war in Syria? Well, you've got 2 million Shiites in Syria. You had almost 20 million Sunnis, but 2 million Shiites, 2 million Christians, 1 million Druze, Yazidis, and Kurds. And these were people who were part of the coalition with Bashar al-Assad. Crazy war. The population of Syria declined by 50% because the Sunni Syrians fled the country. You know, there was a story. I'm very serious. I'm not telling you things that are not true. I'm telling you things that are true. We have a bunch of people in Israel, but they're also in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. They are the Druze. How many people heard of the Druze? And the Druze are descended from Jethro. Don't forget, Abraham had 3 important sons. It was Ishmael, Isaac, and Midian. Midian was son of Keturah. Remember Keturah? Abraham marries her at age 137. And they have a whole bunch of kids. And they mixed in together, the Ishmaelites and the Midianites. So the Druze are from the Midianites. So there's a mountain in South Syria, maybe 20 miles from the Israeli Golan Heights. It's called Mountain of the Druze. And there's 700,000 Druze there. And the Shiites and the Druze are allies. So who's fighting? The Sunnis. They're fighting against the Druze. They had the mountain surrounded. And they were going to go in and kill everybody. And so the Druze leaders in Israel, the Druze officers in the Israeli army, and let me tell you, the Druze are fantastic soldiers and officers. And they came to Netanyahu and said, Israel has to invade the south of Syria to defend the Druze. Or at least let us go as volunteers. You know what Netanyahu did? He flew to Moscow. And he cut a deal with Putin. That Putin would bring in the Russian army, and he saved Bashar al-Assad, and he saved all the minorities in Syria. Because Israel did not want to go into southern Syria. Israel doesn't want to invade other countries. Now, I've got some breaking news for you. Putin's days are numbered. Putin will not last very long in Russia. Because Putin is a nationalist. Right. And the oligarchs are one world government money people. All they want is to make money. And Putin eventually will be removed by the oligarchs. I don't say that with happiness, by the way. Right. I'm not in favor of the one world government. By the way, Netanyahu also was not one world government, and Trump was not one world government.
Right.
So if Putin is removed from power, what's the first thing that happens? The Russians pull out of Syria. There is no such thing as a vacuum. Putin pulls out of Syria, ISIS comes into Syria. It means Israel has to go to defend the 2 million Christians in Damascus and the 1 million Druze and the Yazidis and the Kurds and the small amount of Shiites that are there. You know what that means? Israel is going to reach the Euphrates. Who's on the other side of the Euphrates? The Kurds. The Kurds are our friends. Kurds and Israel always had great relations. Lebanon is an extension of Syria. Same with Lebanon. So I see two things happening, and I'm going to conclude with this. Firstly, I see 10 million Jews and Christians moving to Israel. The rabbis are trying to block it. We will not let the rabbis bring about the deaths of millions of Jews and Christian spouses. And by the way, the rabbis don't like Messianics and they don't like Christians. Hey, wait a second, is the Messiah coming only for the Jews? No, the Messiah is coming for everyone. So the rabbis say, we don't want the Christians, and we don't want the Messianic, and we don't want the Reformed Jews, and the conservative Jews, and the unaffiliated Jews. We only want the ones we want. It means that the rabbis are signing a death sentence on the Jews of America. See, I believe we will have tremendous immigration from America. Unfortunately, there may be a world war, there may be strife here in America, but every country experiences this in their history. I think America will come out on top in the end. But God is shaking the tree of America to get the Jews out. Do you see Jews leaving America? Jews will never leave America. America is the greatest country club in the world for the Jewish people. Nobody wants to go live in Israel, but that's God's plan. And on the other hand, our borders are going to expand. Like the Egyptian TV said, Avi Lipkin is saying it. Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. You know, I met with Lebanese Christians in Israel because of my party. I was campaigning and said, what do you think about Lebanon? And I said, well, I think we should reestablish a Christian Republic of Lebanon. They said, we're voting for you. Christian Republic of Lebanon. I want to encourage the Christians who are of Lebanese descent to go back to Lebanon. Israel will defend them. Amen. Because Lebanon will be under the flag of Israel. Syria will be under the flag of Israel. Jordan will be under the flag of Israel. So Christians who want to make Aliyah will live in these federal autonomous republics under the flag of Israel. This is my solution. Rabbis don't like what I'm saying. I predict that tens of millions of Jews and Christians will be moving to the Middle East. We will use solar energy, green energy, for electricity and to desalinate seawater, and we're going to turn all those countries green. You know, wherever the Jews and the Christians go, it turns green. And the combined populations of this Israelite empire of Jews and Christians will be tens of millions of people. We're going to repopulate the countries which are emptying out because of the terrorism of Islam and the civil wars and fratricide in Islam. I don't hate the Muslims, I love them. I'm talking about systems. And if we believe in God, we can be as foolish as we want to be, but we will always land on our feet. That's the history of America. That's the history, I believe, of Israel and its future. And so I wanted to thank you all very much for having me. Thank Pastor Roger Diaz. At least this time you weren't looking on the wall laughing while I was speaking.
It was only good fun.
Yeah. No, it was wonderful. I was very happy you did that because I'm very proud of my son. And if and when you're able to come to Israel, come with Lipkin tours with my son. And you're going to see the most unbelievable proofs of the veracity of the Bible through science and archaeology. And so God bless all of you, and I'm so happy to be here tonight, and I hope to be back in March, April with my wife, because people in Florida, people in Texas, people in Oklahoma are saying, you're not going to come here again without your wife. And then when my wife comes, they say, Avi, you sit down and let your wife get up and speak. And my wife pinches my calf because she doesn't want to speak, and then she speaks 2 hours. Because my wife has what to say also, because she's from Egypt, and she has a lot of real information that she gives to me, but she's the real source. And so listen to the woman. That's what God said to Abraham. Thank you very much.